Not all UFO encounters involve lights in the sky or distant craft. Some take place much closer, at ground level, and involve figures described as humanoid. In this episode, we'll examine several such encounters spanning decades, each raising the same unsettling question: what were these beings? Welcome to Strange Encounters. In May of 1952, in the suburban community of Prospect Heights, Illinois, a woman named Anne Sohn experienced an encounter that would leave behind physical traces and raise questions that remain unresolved decades later. At approximately 10:50 in the evening, Mrs. Sohn, a former nurse, was sitting on the foot of her young son's bed while waiting for a pot of coffee to boil in the kitchen. The house was quiet. As she looked out through the bedroom window, her attention was suddenly drawn to a bright light appearing off to her right. Hovering over the vacant lot next door was a round, self-luminous object. Mrs. Sohn pressed her face close to the glass and observed it carefully. The object appeared to be between 9 and 12 meters in diameter and was suspended at an estimated height of 30 meters above the ground. It remained in place for several minutes, showing no signs of movement or instability. From the front underside of the object, a dense cloud of vapor emerged. The vapor spread beneath the craft and gave the distinct impression that the object was riding on a low-hanging cloud. Along the side of the craft, Mrs. Sohn could clearly see a row of approximately 15 square windows arranged in a straight line. Beneath the windows was a visible seam or joint, suggesting a division between the upper and lower portions of the machine. The top of the object was surmounted by a pale blue dome, similar in appearance to plexiglass. Inside this dome, faint vertical poles could be seen, evenly spaced and stationary. Aside from the darkened windows and the bluish dome, the entire object emitted an intense white glow. At the rear of the craft were 3 windows that were brighter than the rest. These windows were illuminated from within by a powerful white light. Inside each of the 3 rear windows, Mrs. Sohn could see a figure. 2 of the occupants appeared to be watching her directly. The third figure, positioned farther away, seemed focused on a panel of instruments. The occupants wore one-piece jumpsuits with hoods that appeared to be part of the same garment. Because of the intensity of the internal lighting, facial features could not be distinguished. Mrs. Sohn attempted to wake her son, shaking him gently, but he did not respond. She chose not to call out or leave the room, remaining quietly at the window and continuing her observation. As she watched, the figure in the rear left window moved a control lever. Immediately, the vapor beneath the craft increased in volume. The figure then pulled another lever back with its left hand, and the color of the craft began to shift, cycling through white, green, and orange. Moments later, the figure in the central window pushed a lever forward. Instantly, the entire object, except for the darkened windows and the dome, turned a brilliant red-orange. Without any visible acceleration, the craft made a rapid, shallow climb toward the east and vanished from sight within seconds. There was no sound, no vibration, no trail of exhaust remained in the air. In the days that followed, unusual physical effects were discovered in the area beneath the object. Garlic plants and weeds in the vacant lot were found dead within a roughly circular area measuring approximately 7.5 meters in diameter. Rose bushes growing on the side of Mrs. Sohn's house closest to the lot died soon afterward. Additional damage was noted. The painted trim on the east side of the house blistered, as though exposed to intense heat. A row of evergreen trees in the same direction later withered and died. These effects appeared localized and directional, consistent with the reported departure path of the object. The case was later documented by Ted Blocher in the MUFON UFO Journal, citing an investigation conducted by Robert Runzer. The original report was preserved in the UFO's archives and later referenced by researcher Richard Hall, as well as by Hall and Connors in their catalog of close encounter cases. The year 1952 occupies a critical place in the history of unidentified flying objects. It was a period marked by a sharp increase in sightings, including radar visual incidents, structured craft reports, and a notable number of encounters involving humanoid occupants. Many cases from this area describe domed objects, visible control actions, hooded figures, and sudden departures without sound or acceleration. What distinguishes the Prospect Heights encounter is the combination of prolonged observation, detailed internal activity, and reported physical trace effects. While the case lacks corroborating witnesses and scientific sampling, its internal consistency and documentation by multiple investigators have allowed it to endure in the historical record. More than 70 years later, the sighting reported by Anne Sohn remains a compelling example of a close encounter in which the experience did not end when the object departed. Instead, it left behind physical changes to the environment and a quiet reminder that some encounters leave marks that time does not easily erase. In February of 1952, Maria Farias Leivas was spending time with her family near the quiet lakeside district of Lourenço on the outskirts of Pelotas in southern Brazil. The area was known for its calm waters and warm summer evenings, a place where families gathered to escape the noise of the city. Yet for Maria, the trip brought no sense of peace. From the moment she arrived, she felt unsettled. Throughout the day, an unexplainable nervousness lingered with her, as though something unseen was pressing in from the edges of her awareness. As the night settled in, that feeling only intensified. While her family slept, Maria remained awake, unable to rest. She listened to the sounds of the lake outside, the distant water, the occasional movement along the shore, and felt an overwhelming sense that she was being watched, though she could see nothing out of the ordinary. Sometime around 1 o'clock, a low sound reached her ears. It was steady and rhythmic, and at first she assumed it was a fishing boat moving across the lake. Lourenço was no stranger to late-night activity on the water. Still, something about the sound felt wrong. Compelled by curiosity and unable to ignore the feeling in her chest, Maria stepped outside to investigate. What she encountered was not a boat. Only a few meters away, hovering just above the ground, was a circular object unlike anything she had ever seen. It appeared to be about 5 meters in diameter, with a smooth, silvery surface that reflected the surrounding darkness. Along its side was a row of evenly spaced portholes, and rising from its center was a low dome that glowed with an intense blue light. From beneath the object, a narrow beam of blue illumination shone downward, bathing the ground below. The air around it vibrated with a faint humming sound that seemed to resonate more in her body than in her ears. Maria stood frozen, struggling to make sense of what she was seeing, when an opening appeared in the side of the object. From within emerged a humanoid figure. It had pale skin and long, pointed ears, features that immediately struck her as unnatural. The being was dressed in a tight, silvery suit that matched the surface of the craft, and its head was covered by a helmet. It moved with a deliberate calm as it approached Maria, closing the distance until it stood no more than a meter away. Despite her fear, Maria did not scream or run. She later said that she felt an overwhelming pressure to remain still, as though her body no longer fully belonged to her. The figure spoke. It told her that they needed her, that they wished to take her somewhere else, a place where she would learn new things, knowledge that was not meant to be shared. The words were delivered without warmth or threat, as if the outcome was already decided. Summoning what courage she could, Maria asked a single question. She wanted to know if she would be returned to Earth. The being did not respond. Without answering, it turned away and walked back toward the hovering object. As it did, Maria could see into the interior of the craft. Inside were two additional figures. One, similar in appearance to the first, was seated behind a device that reminded her of a car's dashboard or switchboard, seemingly engaged in controlling the craft. The second figure appeared different. It looked more human. A young man wearing brown overalls, standing inside and staring directly at her in silence. Moments later, the opening sealed shut. The object rose effortlessly and then shot away at tremendous speed, vanishing from sight almost instantly and leaving behind an abrupt, unnatural silence. The humming ceased, the blue light disappeared, and the night returned to darkness. Maria was not taken that night. There were no visible marks on the ground, no physical evidence left behind, and no witnesses to confirm what she had seen. Yet the experience left a deep impression on her, one that would follow her for decades. She claimed the memory remained vivid, accompanied by a lingering sense that something had been interrupted or postponed. What complicates this case is that it did not enter public UFO records until many years later. Researchers have noted that the encounter was not formally documented until the late 1970s, raising questions about memory, influence, and the passage of time. And yet, the details Maria described align closely with other early contact-style cases reported in South America during the mid-20th century. Whether this was an encounter with something truly unknown, a deeply personal experience shaped by fear and imagination, or a memory altered by time, remains open to interpretation. What cannot be denied is the strangeness of the event itself, a moment beside a quiet Brazilian lake when an ordinary night was broken by an offer of forbidden knowledge, delivered by beings who left no trace behind. An encounter that lasted only minutes, but left questions that have never been answered. Some UFO encounters are strange because they're dramatic. Others are strange because they're quiet. They don't involve pursuit, communication, or spectacle. Instead, they suggest observation, brief, methodical, and oddly indifferent to being seen. The next two cases in this episode occurred nearly 20 years apart in different parts of England, involving different witnesses who had no connection to one another. Yet the details they reported are difficult to ignore. This is the first of those encounters. In the early hours of a winter morning in 1966, a man was driving south through the English countryside, following a road he knew well. It was just after 1 o'clock when he decided to pull over near Shipston-on-Stour on a quiet stretch of the A34, surrounded by open fields and gently sloping meadowland. He had performed at a club earlier that night and was making his way back toward Reading. The roads were empty, the countryside was dark. Nothing about the stop seemed unusual at the time. With him in the car was an 11-year-old boy, later believed by investigators to have been a family member. The boy's presence at such a late hour would later raise questions, but at the time, the journey continued without incident. The man parked near a small bridge and stepped out to eat a quick snack, standing beside the road and looking out across the meadow. It was then that both of them noticed a light. In the field beyond the hedge, a brilliant glow had appeared where neither of them believed anything should be. The man had traveled this route many times before and was familiar with the landscape. There were no buildings, no farms, and no installations in that direction. The light was steady, distinct, and clearly out of place. Curious, he suggested taking a closer look. The boy refused to leave the car, frightened by what he could already see. The man, however, stepped forward alone and leaned over the hedge at the edge of the road. What he saw was not a distant glow, but an object. It appeared to be either resting on the ground or hovering just above it. The object was vertical, elongated, and shaped like a bullet. Its surface was metallic and silvery in color, with a single vertical band or marking positioned centrally along its body. On top of the object was a blue light that rotated slowly, sweeping a beam across the surrounding field as it turned. As the light revolved, it briefly illuminated two figures standing beside the object. They were tall, human-like in shape, and dressed in one-piece suits that reflected the blue light as it passed over them. Their faces were not clearly visible, but their posture suggested calm concentration. They appeared to be looking down at the ground, not at the witness, as if examining the soil or vegetation near the base of the object. The man watched for several minutes, transfixed. Then, against his better judgment, he began descending the slope into the meadow. He later estimated the distance between himself and the object to be roughly 100 meters. Behind him, the boy had grown increasingly alarmed. When he saw the man moving away from the car and toward the object, he got out and looked over the hedge himself. He too saw the object and saw the man walking directly toward it. He screamed. At that moment, the rotating blue light swung directly toward them. The beam flooded the area, illuminating both witnesses and the parked car in stark detail. The boy became hysterical. The man panicked and ran back up the slope, forcing the boy into the vehicle. In his haste, he released the handbrake, and the car began rolling downhill before the engine could be started. He later recalled driving blindly, disoriented and terrified, with the boy clinging to him and making it difficult to control the vehicle. The next clear memory he had was passing through Oxford nearly an hour and a half later, relieved simply to see streetlights and signs of civilization again. When they reached Reading, a doctor was called. The boy was still in shock and was prescribed tranquilizers. Even afterward, he reportedly begged the man not to travel that road again, but his pleas were dismissed. The man believed the danger had passed and that daylight would make the route safe. Later that day, he returned to the location. In the meadow, he found a large, darkened circular area in the grass. The vegetation appeared scorched, and within the circle were faint traces of a fine, silvery powder scattered across the ground. There was no obvious explanation for the marks, and no known agricultural or industrial activity in the area that could account for them. The incident might have remained a private memory, but it did not end there. Years later, the man would develop a tumor on the left side of his brain. He became permanently disabled following surgery to remove it and suffered lasting neurological and psychological effects. He came to believe that the blue beam he had encountered that night had caused the illness. Investigators could confirm the existence of the tumor and the surgery, but they could not support a direct causal link to the encounter. When the case finally came to light decades later, it was investigated by members of the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. The witness, now in his late 40s, showed clear emotional distress when recounting the events, particularly when the boy was mentioned. He claimed the child had later died in an unrelated road accident, along with a member of his family. Investigators chose not to press him further on the matter. A psychological assessment noted memory lapses and signs of disturbance consistent with his medical history. While he was described as likable and sincere, investigators acknowledged that his illness and surgery could have compromised the reliability of his recollections. They openly considered the possibility that the encounter had been reshaped in memory as a way for the witness to make sense of his later condition. At the same time, they stopped short of dismissing the account entirely. The object's shape, the presence of humanoid figures, and the report of a silvery powder residue closely resembled details from other independent close encounter cases. Whether these similarities strengthened the case or cast further doubt upon it was left unresolved. In the end, the investigators offered no firm conclusion. The witness appeared genuine. The experience had clearly affected him deeply, yet the passage of time, trauma, and illness left too many unanswered questions to determine what had truly occurred in that meadow near Shipston-on-Stour. As with many close encounters, the case sits uneasily between explanation and mystery, leaving behind traces in the grass, in memory, and in the long shadow of something that may never be fully understood. By itself, the Shipston-on-Stour encounter is deeply unsettling. It includes close proximity, humanoid figures, physical traces, and long-term psychological impact, yet it resists clear explanation. For many years, it stood alone. Then, nearly 2 decades later, along a remote stretch of industrial waterway in northern England, another witness reported something strikingly similar. This second case did not emerge as a continuation of the first. It was investigated independently. It involved a different setting, a different time, and different people. And yet, the description that followed would raise quiet but persistent questions. In the early months of 1984, along a quiet stretch of the Manchester Ship Canal, a witness encountered something that would remain unexplained for decades. The location was remote, bordered by water, grasslands, and low embankments, a place where human activity was minimal and the night air was still and calm. It was the kind of setting where unusual lights, if they appeared, would be immediately noticeable, and that is exactly what happened. The witness reported seeing a metallic object, elongated and vertical in appearance, resembling a bullet or a small cigar. Its surface was silvery, reflecting the faint ambient light of the area. A distinctive marking or band ran along its body, giving the object a subtle pattern in the otherwise uniform metal. On top of the craft, a blue or bluish-white light rotated slowly, sweeping a beam across the canal bank and the surrounding terrain. As the beam moved, it revealed 2 figures standing beside the object. These figures were tall and humanoid in shape. Their proportions were human, and they wore one-piece suits that reflected the light in a metallic sheen. The witness described them as calm and methodical. They appeared to be focused entirely on the ground near the object, inspecting the soil or vegetation rather than observing the witness. There was no overt interaction, no signs of aggression, and no attempt to conceal themselves. Their actions seemed purposeful, almost clinical. The witness observed the figures and the object for several minutes. The craft did not move noticeably, and there was no sound of engines, rotors, or other propulsion mechanisms. The blue light rotated in a steady, controlled manner, illuminating sections of the area in sequence. The encounter was largely visual, yet the detail in the witness's recollection suggested a close proximity. After the figures and the craft were gone, the witness discovered traces at the site. The ground appeared disturbed, with areas of discolored or flattened vegetation. In some places, a fine silvery or grayish powder was found, scattered sparingly across the earth. The presence of this material, along with the impressions made on the terrain, made the encounter particularly unusual. These physical traces could not be easily explained by conventional activity and remain a notable feature of the case. Investigators later assessed the report and confirmed that the witness appeared sincere. There was no indication of fabrication nor any apparent motive to deceive. As with many close encounters, the lack of corroborating evidence beyond the witness and the physical traces prevented a conclusive determination. The incident was classified as a close encounter of the third kind due to the apparent observation of humanoid figures in association with the craft. What makes this case particularly intriguing to researchers is its striking similarity to our earlier British case from 1966 near Shipston-on-Stour. Both encounters feature a metallic, elongated craft, a rotating blue light, two tall humanoid figures in reflective suits, and the presence of silvery powder residue. The parallels between these events have been noted in several UFO research publications, though investigators remain cautious about interpreting them. There's no evidence that the witnesses were aware of one another's experiences, and the cases are separated by nearly 2 decades. Yet the pattern of the observations, the shape of the craft, the behavior of the figures, and the unusual traces left behind raise questions that conventional explanations struggle to address. In the end, the Manchester Ship Canal encounter remains unresolved. The witness's testimony, combined with the physical traces, points to an event that defies conventional interpretation. Like many other close encounters of the third kind, it exists on the threshold between what can be observed and what can be verified, leaving behind impressions of beings and machinery that may never be fully explained. It's a reminder that even in familiar landscapes, in moments when the night is quiet and the world seems ordinary, there are experiences that challenge our understanding of what is possible. The Manchester Ship Canal case stands as a singular record of such an event, vivid in the memory of those who witnessed it, yet elusive in the evidence it left behind. Taken separately, each of these last 2 encounter stories can be questioned. Memory can falter, perception can mislead, trauma and time can reshape experience, and yet, when 2 reports from different decades describe the same unusual details, a metallic, elongated craft, a rotating blue light, tall humanoid figures in reflective suits, and traces left behind in the soil, coincidence becomes harder to dismiss. Investigators have never claimed these events prove the same phenomenon. They've never claimed they prove anything at all. What they have acknowledged is the discomfort of pattern. In both cases, the figures did not approach the witness. They did not communicate. They appeared focused on the ground, as if engaged in some brief, deliberate task. If these were hallucinations, they were strangely procedural. If they were misinterpretations, they followed an unusually specific template. And if they were something else entirely, they left behind just enough detail to resist being forgotten. The English countryside is filled with quiet places, roads, fields, waterways, where very little happens and where even less is witnessed. But occasionally, in those places, something intrudes. It does not announce itself. It does not linger. It leaves only memory, disturbed ground, and unanswered questions. And sometimes, years later, another witness stands somewhere else and describes the same thing. It was the summer of 1975 when a young boy named Trevor, last initial P, was vacationing with his family in the quiet hills of Powys, Wales. One evening, around 7 o'clock, Trevor wandered alone toward the summit of Wylfa Hill, a lonely ridge overlooking the countryside. He was curious, adventurous, and completely unaware that this walk would change his life forever. As he reached the top, something caught his eye. About 50 feet beyond the ridge, resting directly on the ground, was an object unlike anything he had ever seen. It was roughly 40 feet wide, with a circular base about 7 feet tall, and rising from it was a clear, plastic-like dome. Even at a distance, the object radiated an otherworldly presence. Large round lights, about 5 feet across, were evenly spaced around the base. They glimmered in strange colors, recessed into the metallic surface as if they were part of the object itself rather than separate lights. Inside the dome, Trevor could make out a structure that was roughly 7 feet tall and 15 feet wide, smooth, metallic, and featureless. It had no knobs, dials, or markings, just a silent, imposing presence. But it wasn't the craft itself that held Trevor's attention. It was the two forms inside. They were unlike anything he had ever imagined. Standing on opposite sides of the structure, the entities were about 7 feet tall, whitish and translucent, their shapes constantly shifting in an almost liquid way. They seemed to contain hundreds of small, white, 6-inch disc-like objects that moved endlessly within them. Despite this internal motion, the central portions of the forms remained eerily still, as if controlled by some hidden mechanism. They didn't resemble humans, animals, or robots. They were something entirely different, something alien. Then, after just a few moments, the scene shifted. On the extreme right side of the base, a rectangular panel about 7 feet across extended outward and reached toward the ground. Simultaneously, one of the jelly-like forms began to move downward, disappearing into an opening beneath the craft, as though drawn through a hidden passageway. Terrified, Trevor ran. He fled down the hill, yelling for his father, insisting that he had to see this to believe it. Together they climbed back up the hilltop, but when they arrived, the panel had vanished and the two forms were back in their original positions beside the internal structure. Then something even stranger happened. The lights around the base and at the apex of the dome began to blink faster and faster. The colors, unfamiliar, otherworldly, started to spread, washing over the entire object. Gradually, the craft and the beings vanished, blending seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. When Trevor and his father searched the site, there was nothing left. No object, no markings, no trace that anything had been there at all. In the days and weeks that followed, Trevor experienced severe and disturbing effects. He first lost his voice, then his sight, which began in one eye and eventually affected both. His personality changed. He became argumentative, aggressive, and withdrawn. These challenges were significant enough that he eventually required psychiatric counseling. While the official report doesn't include the results of psychological testing, it's clear that the encounter left a profound and lasting impact. This is the account of the encounter on Wylfa Hill, a story of a boy, a strange craft, and two amorphous beings unlike anything seen before or since. It's a case that stands out even in the extensive records of UFO phenomena, a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling experiences are not the loud or explosive ones, but the quiet, impossible ones that leave no trace behind. Across different eras and locations, many witnesses describe remarkably similar humanoid entities. Whether these encounters point to misidentification, psychological effects, or something unknown, the accounts remain unexplained and deeply unsettling. Until next time, keep looking up.